Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is Pro-Revenge Story. Just found out about this subreddit and had to share this story. The initial reason for the revenge happened in 2020, but the revenge only happened in 2024. I'll keep everything vague as not to be recognized. For context, back in 2020, I was a graduate student pursuing my master's degree. That was my last year in the program. We had 24 months to finish all the work and the dissertation. My advisor was a professor who was very well known and experienced in my field of work. Let's call her Rebecca. Fake name. Rebecca and I had worked together with research since my college days as I became part of an undergraduate research program with her. At that point, we had been working for about 4 years, and as with any advisor-student relationship, we had our disagreements quite often. Rebecca was used to doing her experiments a certain archaic way. "We've always collected data this way," she'd insist whenever I suggested alternatives. "Why change what works? Because there are more efficient methods now," I'd counter. "We could save half the grant money and get better results." I knew there were better uses of our grant money and always tried to push toward a more advanced method, especially correlating data collection and statistics. However, our relationship was always good. I knew her husband and had been to her house numerous times for department gatherings and research meetings. She was a little set in her ways, but we managed to make good progress in our field. Anyhow, by the end of 2020, I presented my dissertation to the department and was approved with flying colors. "This is exceptional work," the department chair told me during my defense. "You should be very proud." My data still wasn't published in any paper as I wanted to have more analysis in different areas to make a more robust and better paper. With that said, my dissertation was published, and by all reasons, that is my work and my experiments. After I got my MS, I decided to pursue a PhD. While I was still going to work in the same field, I wanted to use different techniques and thus talked with Rebecca about going to pursue a PhD under a different professor at another university. "I think it's a great idea for you to branch out," she told me over coffee one day. "It'll give you a broader perspective on the field." She always encouraged me to do better and look for ways to diversify my views. I went ahead and contacted a professor outside my country at another university to pursue my PhD. I got approved and soon moved away. For the next 2 years, I still kept contact with Rebecca, but during the 3rd year, she stopped responding. Initially, I thought she had changed her email or something, but didn't think much of it. Time flew by, and in 2024, while reading papers and writing my own, I came across a paper that was strangely similar to my research. Interested in it, I opened it up to read. To my shock, it was a paper by my ex-advisor. She was listed as the advisor, and another guy, who from his curriculum is her current master's student named Marcus, was the lead author. Reading the title, I thought, "Hey, that's neat." She continued researching it, but boy, I was wrong. Reading the paper, I got increasingly angry. That wasn't new research, it was my research. My data was all in that paper, even my graphs and tables. Initially, I thought, oh well, she's also an author, and if she is citing it, there shouldn't be a problem. But unfortunately, that wasn't the case. My name was nowhere near that paper as they claimed that research as original. I stared at my screen in disbelief. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered to myself, scrolling through page after page of my own work. Now, I was livid. I sent an email to Rebecca confronting her, which was never replied to. "Rebecca, I've come across your recent publication with Marcus, and I'm deeply concerned. The data, methodology, and even the graphs appear to be identical to my master's work. I'd appreciate an explanation about why I wasn't credited as an author, or even mentioned in the acknowledgments. However, I am not a pushover, and will never allow people to claim my own work as theirs. She made a mistake by using my data. I'm a researcher, and I keep everything I ever worked on saved in external SSDs encrypted and in my own possession, all cataloged with date entries, and I even had my own dissertation to prove my work. In my country, research is financed by governmental grants. I wrote an email to the dean of the grants institution explaining the situation, with proof of everything. I also sent an email to the journal in which that was published contesting their paper and explaining everything. I can provide time-stamped data files, my original dissertation, and even the early drafts showing this work was completed by me in 2020, I wrote in my complaint. It didn't take longer than 15 days for me to get a follow-up. The institution responsible for the grant was furious. They cut all financial aid for her and her student and made a formal requirement to the university requesting her immediate termination. The journal retracted the paper and is now suing her for plagiarism. The grant administrator called me personally. "We take academic integrity very seriously," she said. "Thank you for bringing this to our attention. We've already begun proceedings against Dr. Rebecca. Now, after all these years, I learned that she was indeed fired and hasn't been able to work in the field ever since." I never met her again and have no intention of ever doing so. Now my work is published and I'm recognized for my contributions in the field. Maybe that was a petty thing to do, but I couldn't allow people to get away with claiming my work as theirs. Edit. Wow, didn't expect so many replies. Thank you for the words. A few things. The only reason I said it was petty is because since she is also an author, she has the right to publish it. But she needed to include me on the paper, which she didn't do. Also, there are laws in place in my country that allow the journal to sue her. This is not an international journal, that's why that happened. I work with medical research for those who asked. But I can't share the paper, as that would easily identify me. Another thing, people have been questioning my terms. In my country, a master's candidate needs to present a dissertation, and a PhD candidate needs to present a thesis. Sorry if I wasn't clear enough. Cheers. The next one is an entitled people story. So this happened a few years back when my wife and I bought our dream house. It was this gorgeous property right on the water with about 200 feet of lakefront. The house was built in the 1960s by some wealthy guy who basically created his own private compound. We got it for what seemed like a steal because the previous owner had passed away and his kids just wanted to sell quickly. The property came with this beautiful wooden dock and a boathouse. I'd always been into fishing and my wife loved kayaking, so having direct water access was exactly what we wanted. The lake itself was pretty small, maybe 50 acres total, surrounded by about 30 houses that had been built over the decades. Everything was perfect for the first few months. I had my 24-foot fishing boat moored at our dock, and we spent most weekends out on the water. The neighbors seemed friendly enough, waving when they saw us. A few of them had boats too, though most were smaller pontoon boats or jet skis. Then the HOA showed up. I should mention that when we bought the house, there was no mention of any HOA in our paperwork. Our real estate agent never brought it up, and it wasn't in any of the disclosures. As far as we knew, we were just homeowners on a lake with no strings attached. But apparently, about 10 years ago, most of the neighbors had formed an HOA to maintain property values and establish community standards. They claimed it was voluntary, but they'd been getting more aggressive about trying to get everyone to join. The first contact was a knock on the door from this woman who introduced herself as the HOA president. She was probably in her 60s, had that haircut that screams, "I want to speak to your manager," and was carrying a clipboard. She explained that while we weren't technically members, they hoped we'd consider joining for the good of the community. I politely declined. We'd bought the house specifically because we wanted privacy and freedom to enjoy our property without restrictions. Plus, the HOA fees were something like $200 a month, which seemed ridiculous for a voluntary organization. She didn't take it well. She started going on about how non-compliance with community standards could affect everyone's property values. I thanked her for her time and closed the door. That should have been the end of it, but these people were persistent. Over the next few weeks, I started getting letters in my mailbox. They weren't official HOA business since I wasn't a member, but they were friendly reminders about various community guidelines. My grass was apparently half an inch too long. My mailbox needed repainting. My outdoor furniture didn't match the aesthetic character of the neighborhood. I ignored all of it. This was America, and I owned my property free and clear. Then things escalated. I came home from work one Tuesday to find a bright orange citation tucked under my boat's windshield wiper. It was from the HOA, claiming that my boat violated community standards for watercraft. According to their citation, boats over 20 feet required special approval, and my 24-footer was an eyesore that disrupted the peaceful nature of the lake. The fine was $500. I was furious. These people had no authority over me whatsoever, and now they were messing with my boat. I called the number on the citation and got the HOA president again. She was completely unapologetic. She explained that even though I wasn't a member, my boat was visible from other properties and therefore subject to community standards. She said if I didn't pay the fine and remove the boat within 30 days, they'd take further action. I asked what authority they had to issue fines to non-members. She got snippy and said they'd consulted with their lawyer and had every right to enforce community standards that affected property values. That night, I decided to do some research. I started by pulling out all our closing documents and really reading through everything carefully. Then I went to the county recorder's office and started looking up property records and deeds. What I found was absolutely fascinating. It turned out our property wasn't just a house with lakefront access. According to the original 1962 deed, the guy who built our house had also purchased the entire lake bed and water rights. The lake was completely artificial. He'd had it dug out and filled as part of his estate. When other houses were built around the lake over the years, they were granted easements for water access and recreational use, but the actual ownership of the lake itself had never been transferred. It just passed from owner to owner along with our house. I owned the entire lake. I spent the next week researching water rights law and property easements. I wanted to make sure I understood exactly what this meant before I did anything. I even consulted with a property attorney who confirmed what I'd discovered. The easements granted to the other properties allowed them to use the lake for recreation, but I, as the lake owner, had the right to regulate that use within reasonable limits. I also had the authority to revoke access entirely if the easements were being used to harass or interfere with my property rights. Armed with this knowledge, I decided it was time for some malicious compliance. I called the HOA president back and told her I'd be happy to comply with their demands. I was removing my boat from the lake immediately. She seemed surprised that I was giving in so easily, but she was clearly pleased. She thanked me for being reasonable and said it was a good first step toward joining the community. Then I dropped the bomb. I explained that I'd done some research and discovered that I actually owned the lake. Since the HOA felt my boat was inappropriate for the water, I decided they were probably right about the whole thing being an eyesore. In fact, I was so concerned about maintaining the aesthetic character of the area that I was revoking all recreational easements effective immediately. There was a long silence. She asked what I meant by revoking easements. I explained that since I owned the lake and she'd made it clear that boats were inappropriate, I was prohibiting all watercraft on my property. This included boats, jet skis, kayaks, canoes, and even swimming. She started sputtering about how that was impossible, that everyone had always used the lake, that I couldn't just shut it down. I very politely explained that she'd been absolutely right about maintaining community standards, and the most effective way to ensure no inappropriate watercraft disturbed the peaceful nature of the lake was to eliminate all watercraft. She hung up on me. Within an hour, my phone was ringing nonstop. I started getting visits from angry neighbors. The HOA president showed up with 2 other board members demanding to know if I was serious. I was completely serious. I'd already contacted a marine patrol service that worked with private lake owners. For a reasonable monthly fee, they'd patrol my lake and ensure no unauthorized watercraft were on the property. I'd also ordered signs that would be posted around the lake perimeter, clearly marking it as private property with no public access. The neighbors were furious. Several of them had bought their houses specifically for lake access. A few had spent thousands on boats and docks. The guy across the lake had just bought a new jet ski. But here's the thing, I was completely within my legal rights. The easements I was revoking had always been conditional, and harassment of a property owner was grounds for revocation under state law. The HOA president tried to threaten legal action, but her own lawyer told her she didn't have a case. The historical deeds were clear, and my ownership of the lake was indisputable. For 2 weeks, I enforced the ban strictly. Anyone who put a boat in the water got visited by Marine Patrol and escorted off the property. I even had a few swimmers removed. The neighborhood was in chaos. Property values actually started dropping because houses that had been marketed as lakefront with water access suddenly had no water access. Several neighbors put their houses up for sale immediately. Finally, the HOA president called and asked if we could meet to discuss a resolution. I agreed, but I had conditions. First, they would formally acknowledge in writing that they had no authority over my property and would never again attempt to issue citations or fines to me. Second, they would reimburse me for the legal research and marine patrol costs I'd incurred, about $2,000 total. Third, they would put in writing that my boat was appropriate for the lake and that I had their full support for any watercraft I chose to use. She agreed to everything. But I wasn't done. I also required that they send a formal written apology to me and my wife for the harassment and that they publicly acknowledge to all neighbors that their attempt to regulate my property had been inappropriate and legally baseless. They balked at the public apology part, so I told them that was fine. I was perfectly happy to keep the lake closed permanently. I mentioned that I'd been thinking about turning it into a private fishing preserve anyway, maybe stocking it with some expensive fish. They agreed to the apology. Within a week, I had everything in writing. The HOA sent a formal letter to all neighborhood residents explaining that they had overstepped their authority and that my use of the lake was entirely appropriate. They publicly acknowledged that their citation had been baseless and apologized for any confusion. Only then did I restore lake access to the neighborhood, but I kept my boat right where it was and I added a second boat, a bigger one. The best part? Several neighbors were so disgusted with the HOA's behavior that they quit the organization entirely. Within a year, the HOA had lost so many members that they couldn't maintain their voluntary status and basically dissolved. Now we have a peaceful neighborhood with no HOA. Everyone gets to enjoy the lake, and I have 2 boats that nobody dares complain about. Sometimes the best way to deal with people who abuse their perceived authority is to show them what real authority looks like. The next one is a petty revenge story. I, 23F, worked about a year ago at a call center that was small and our policy on clothes was business casual. For reference, I am 5'3" and am a BBW. Have a pear shape with big thighs and C-cup chest. On the curvier side, but still big. I had always been very insecure and had body image issues, but then became very confident. I was very nice and always smiling to people as well as dressing with clothes that appeal to my shape. Yes, a little tight, but no cleavage, nor short dresses, skirts. IDK if it's conceited of me to say, but I have came a long way since being the shy, baggy-clothed duff from my high school. Well, there's this woman who is well into her 40s who is big too. She would come in with Crocs baggy pajama pants and super baggy shirts with out-of-bed hair. She would always stare at me almost in anger, or talk about me as well. I never cared because I had gotten used to it. Until she started becoming bolder by coming up to me and nitpicking my clothes. For reference, the first time she came up to me, I had a long cardigan and a tube-top jumpsuit. I have a bigger bottom than my chest, so it came to a surprise when she had said my breasts were out and that I needed to cover up, as she proceeded to tug at my jumpsuit. I cried in the bathroom by how embarrassed I was and went to my supervisor about this, asking if I was out of dress code. She said no and said she'd talk to her. Mind you, I didn't know they were besties. So I go about my shift. This happens 2 more times and no resolution. My last straw came when she started making a scene in front of my coworkers. I was wearing a knee-length skirt with a sweater. As I'm talking to a coworker and others are around, she comes up and says, "Again? It's as if you're asking for attention." Confused, I look around and ask, what does she mean? She points at my legs and says I'm practically naked. My skirt had lifted an inch up from my knee from shifting around in my seat. So I stand up and say out loud for everybody to hear, "Why do you constantly pick on me? Is it really my clothes or is it something different like the color of my skin? I'm really curious because you constantly are messing with me and aren't even worried about your agents." She was a supervisor for a neighboring company cubicle, but constantly by our desks to try and flirt with the male workers. She then started stuttering and darting her eyes around, realizing everybody started looking and standing from their desks. She quickly said, No, it's not like that. I'm just trying to watch out for you. You know, big girl to big girl. Just wasn't sure if you were okay with what you were wearing," I say. Clearly, I'm here working and I have my own supervisor to LMK if I am out of dress code. After that, it was nothing but smiles and constantly offering me snacks. Sorry for the long post, but still makes me chuckle to this day. Edit. I forgot to add that when she had tried to make a scene in front of my coworkers and I had called her out, her excuse was that HR had told her to come over and let me know I was dressed inappropriately, which I told her that I know no management is present nor any female sups aside from her, so was so implying a male higher up was looking at my body in an inappropriate way. And then she again started stuttering and making excuses. The next one is a malicious compliance story. Story takes place in the latter half of 2022 in the UK. Names and company changed, not mentioned due to NDA and overzealousness on behalf of company. Part 1, the issue begins. I worked at a major tourist attraction during this time, and we got thousands of customers every day. Part of our attraction was outside, and we had expanded part of the outside to accommodate new parts for the attraction. In order to blend with the theme of the new section, a brand new brick pavement was installed in the area. Upper management had at the time a tendency to not think things 100% through, and this was no different. The big thing was that it was decided not to install an anti-slip surface on the brick pavement. Now we were in the middle of summer and it was a particularly dry summer, but nonetheless when it isn't dry we got a lot of rain and a lot of snow and frost. We need that anti-slip surface. We told upper management this, and as per usual fell on deaf ears. Winter comes far too soon, and with it all the rain that was meant for summer, and to make up for a dry autumn. And the winter of 2022 was bad for the UK. Temperatures fell to single digits, and then negative in the Celsius. With the cold came a permanent frost over the brick pavement, and the beginning of malicious compliance. Part 2, the compliance. The first slips and falls heralded us to the idea. At the time, the company required us to write in paper, accident and incident reports about everything if something bad happened. Now, anyone who's worked in tourist attractions, we've all seen kids fall from being too excited, and we often do a polite to see if blood/gore/missing limbs are present, and if all is good, we just ignore it. No one likes paperwork. Not to mention, due to upper management's distaste for us, we had to take the long way to the offices where the paper was to fill it in, and get someone to cover us while we filled it in. Upper management hated us being in their special offices and not out with the paying customers. It is worth mentioning in their defense, our lower managers and middle managers were on our side, because even they knew what upper management was doing was utter nonsense. So they saw what we were doing and agreed with it. What happened was every single slip that occurred outside on the impromptu ice rink that was the brick pavement we would report. That's about 20 minutes of us, in the warmth, not freezing our butts off, writing about how someone had slipped in the exact same manner as the last 10 people, all in plain view of upper management. I like to believe they began working from home more due to us being there in their office. I learned from one of our lower managers that is a dear friend that the stack of reports handed to upper management was measurable in inches. I do not regret saying I was one of the top 3 contributors to that pile. Part 3. The bare minimum response. Upper management finally began to make efforts to fix the situation. They decided to just cordon off the vast majority of the brick pavement with temporary, ugly barriers, and put down anti-slip mats to make a path for the parts of the attraction that they wanted visitors to walk in. They thought they had won. We knew better. Anyone who has worked with tourists knows that tourists are a special breed of stupid. Told not to touch the very important items, they will touch. Told to keep their kids near and not let them wander off. I think the record for no lost kids was 4 hours. And so these barriers that everyone is required to respect, well, clearly it doesn't apply to me. Each time we told people not to go underneath these barriers, they looked like deer caught in the headlights. And the barriers were just low enough that kids would duck under and run straight onto the ice and onto their butts. Even more accident and incident reports rocked up as a result, and all upper management would do is tell us low, barely above minimum wage earners to do a better job policing this part of the attraction. Part 4. Wake up call. School kids. Oh, how we loathed schools, mostly teenager ones. Little kids, no more than 5, 10. Oh, they were delightful. We were happy with them. The main reason was because the teachers, who are still responsible for the kids no matter what, actually followed our guidelines. So naturally we liked the little ones, and were genuinely more concerned for them than normal. We all then had our moment of fear when it was reported that a 7-year-old boy had slipped and fallen on the ice, no doubt having been playing with classmates and unintentionally not seeing where he was going. That didn't save his 2 front teeth chipping and a call for our on-site first aid team to come and help with the blood. Luckily, he seemed alright beside the fact the tooth fairy was going to be paying double that night. But for us, lower and middle management, it was the final straw. I wish I had taken a photo of that accident and incident report for posterity, the number of people co-signing it. Part 5, the fallout. Nobody wants a lawsuit, and that kids' parents had grounds to do so like nobody's business. The fact a child had been injured from negligence did not look good on upper management's part, and it wasn't as if they could pretend nothing had happened. Everyone had been telling them about the risk, and when it got to the big wigs, I can only imagine what was said. Miraculously, and within 2 days of the kid's teeth, they put an anti-slip surface on the brick pavement, at what was probably more of a cost than had they just done so in the summer. The barriers were removed, and the number of paper accident and incident reports dramatically decreased. They finally also got around to installing tablet devices with which we could fill in reports without needing to drop position. Our lives were made easier, they got an earful, and that kid probably has a fun story for when he's older and has kids himself. I'd like to say upper management learned their lesson and took our words on board for future endeavors, but that is like expecting the dog to not poop on the carpet after the first time you shove their nose into it. I no longer work there for other reasons, and many of the people who joined in the act of malicious compliance have since gone elsewhere. But for nearly 3 glorious months, you had never seen a department work together like ours in that way before or since. The next one is an entitled people story. I work at a dispensary in the downtown area of my city. We get all kinds of people coming in to pick up their products, from business people in town for a conference, locals who live in the surrounding apartments, tourists, and people just in the area. What we don't get a lot of is people acting like the staff has some sort of grudge against them personally when they are refused service. The bulk of people who get irritated at us are easy to brush off. It doesn't matter that someone is 62 if their ID is expired. It's the law, and I'm not going to jail and getting this whole place possibly shut down because you flew out of your home state with an expired ID. So, the story. A couple days ago, maybe 4 now, we had a customer come in. At first, she knocked at the front door, then apparently got upset with another customer because we didn't answer the unlocked door while busy. Weird, but whatever, she has now made it inside. This customer was a new one and was wanting a small joint and said she didn't have much money. No problem, we have inexpensive options, but with tax, our least expensive item is about $6. She starts looking at the menu and says, I've only got like $1, but y'all have money, I'll just take some of that. I wasn't the one helping this customer, but I was the manager on duty, so I was listening in at this point. My coworker, I'll refer to as G, was helping her, and this was the conversation that followed. G: we don't have anything for $1 and I can't just give away product. Customer: well, y'all got all kinds of money over there and in there. Points to our employee tip jars at each register. G: that's not money I can give away. It isn't mine, and I'm not allowed to give any customers money aside from their change. Cust: well, y'all got the money, so why don't you just give me a __. G: I can't do that. If you're unable to make a purchase, I need to ask you to leave so I can help the next customer in line. Cust: well, I don't see why y'all hate me. You can just give me the __. You don't need to be a jerk about it. G: ma'am, it is not legal for me to give away anything in this store. We can't dig into tip money to make a sale to a customer, and I'm going to have to ask that you leave now. Please have a good rest of your day. We pool tips for the full day and split among the people who worked that day based on how many hours they were there working. Customer kind of roams around the store, continuing to say things like, y'all got money, and it's just a __, y'all should just give it to me. She even reaches out to the tip jars a couple times, pointing at them and saying, money is right there. She did eventually leave, but it also took one of our regular customers, who works security for a liquor store close by, to ask me and G if we would like assistance in removing the customer. Customer goes outside, but not even a minute later, a new customer came in and told me that she was sitting out front trying to bully people coming in to buying her something inside. I then had to go and stand outside to wait for her to leave the property because her soliciting other customers to buy for her can get my store in just as much trouble as giving away product. I told her that I needed her to leave because she was not legally allowed to have someone else buy for her. If we have a suspicion that someone is buying for a third party not in the store with them at the time, we are required by policy and law to refuse the sale and mark the customer profile with a note saying they shop for people outside the store. I love the product I work with. It has so many uses and benefits that I always want to support people learning about and using the plant, but I have to follow the law. It doesn't matter if you're a Hollywood actor, we have gotten a few, a politician, someone without housing, or a personal friend. You will be treated the same when it comes to the laws surrounding the business I'm in. It has no standing on who you are and everything to do with how heavily regulated the industry is. The next one is an entitled parent story. It is currently 4 a.m. while I'm typing this, and I can't believe that I'm typing this because this is genuinely insane. Just before we get started, I have to say the obligatory, English is not my first language. Okay, so I, F19, am the older sister to a really dumb but well-intentioned kid, M16, who we'll call Jake for the sake of this story. Today, Jake was supposed to go to a party at a friend's house. It might have been a birthday party, but I'm not entirely sure, and subsequently sleep over. As you know, kids can be dumb, and many were drinking, including Jake's friend. Apparently, birthday boy drank so much he passed out, but that's neither here nor there. Someone's mom came to pick her kid up. This is the entitled mom of the story, as is customary, we'll call her Karen, and so the crap show began. Karen went to get her kid and saw Jake and his friends still at the house. This was around 3:30 a.m., which is way past our curfew. This is relevant, I promise. Karen starts freaking out, and the dialogue below ensues, which has been kindly translated from Spanish and built from the bits and pieces I could gather out of my frantic and tired little brother by yours truly. Karen: what are you guys still doing here? It's late. Jake: oh, hi, Auntie Karen. We're all supposed to sleep over. Karen: well, it's late. You guys should head home. Friend 1: Auntie, we can't. We're all supposed to be here. Our parents are asleep. Friend 2: yeah, my mom will probably freak out. Karen: well, I see the birthday boy is asleep. You can't sleep over if he's asleep. You guys have to head home. Jake: it's fine, Auntie. We all have permission to be here. Karen: no, I'm the adult here, and you have to listen to me. I won't leave until all of you leave. Did I make myself clear? Jake: yes, Auntie. And so my underage brother and his friends have effectively been kicked out of their friend's house by some crazy auntie who believes she's entitled to do so. They all prepare to leave and start making arrangements on how they'll go about it. Jake isn't too worried, even if he doesn't have house keys on him at that moment. My dad is a bit of an insomniac, and he's usually awake at this time. My dad also trusts him enough with his car keys, so he does have a way to get home. He was getting, his car, when suddenly he hears a voice. Karen: young man, what do you think you're doing? Jake: hey, Auntie, I'm driving home. Karen: Well, you can't do that. All of you are obviously drunk and you can't drive. I'm the adult here and you have to listen to me. For the record, my brother was the furthest thing from drunk. Maybe his friends were, but he really wasn't. Anyways, he keeps trying to argue, but at some point he decides it's just not worth it and decides to get a ride with one of his other friends that was also kicked out. A very similar conversation took place, with the auntie accusing his friends of being drunk too, of not being able to drive home in the state they were in, and demanding that they listen to her because she's an adult. God knows how, but my little brother managed to get home safely. I tried asking him about it, but he was kind of frantic. I assume he got a ride because walking home at this hour in my city is stupidly dangerous, even for small distances. Anyways, he managed to open the front gate. It can be opened manually since it's broken RN. But he realized the doors were locked, and that Dad was most likely asleep at this point, which would have been unusual if it wasn't for the fact that he had just gotten home from a Christmas party and was probably really tired. Jake decided to call Mom, bless the fact she's a light sleeper, which was irrelevant here since she didn't pick up. He tried Dad, who also didn't pick up as well. At this point, Jake panics. He doesn't know the landline number, he's running out of battery, and decides to throw one last Hail Mary at being able to sleep in a warm bed. He sees my light is still on and calls me. Jake. Ash, are you awake? Me. Yeah, what's going on? Jake. I need you to open the door, it's locked. Me, thinking he had the car and not understanding what's going on. Oh yeah, the gate is broken, remember? You have to open it manually. Wait, why are you coming home so late? Dad's gonna be pissed. Jake. No, Ash, you don't understand. It's locked. Just open the door, please. I'll explain in a second. Me, still not understanding what in the fresh hell was going on. Wait, we can lock the gate? How is that possible? Jake. No, Ash, the gate isn't locked. That's not the problem. The front door is locked and I don't have keys and the alarm system is on. Can you please disable it so I can come inside? Me. Okay, but if Mom or Dad hears and they're mad, this is on you. I went downstairs, really confused because he had never gotten home so late. The latest our curfew can be is usually 2:30 a.m., and this was almost 4 a.m. As I mentioned, my father is a bit of an insomniac too, so he usually waits for us too. Needless to say, I was extremely baffled by the situation. That at least until he explained what happened. Honestly, I'm tired of people doing this. I've been through similar stuff, TBH. I'll update if anything happens tomorrow, but right now I need some sleep. Good night, everyone. Anyway.